Hello, welcome to CubsPS Plus, the Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, an exciting and expanding group of shows that includes the Bleacher Bunch, the Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, Baseball Rabbit Hole, Bricks Behind the Ivy, and all of our supporters get a bonus Cubs Pod, daily drop, game reaction that we rotate through and put out for all of our supporters. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available, ad-free, as are the rest of the shows, Patreon supporters at patreon.com/bleacherbunch, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can find me on X or Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. A spin on the baseball metric, OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And if you've done that, thank you. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. It's July 30th. It's been a while since I've done this. The Cubs are 2 games behind the Brewers, playing this afternoon to try to get back within a game of first place. And Ryne Sandberg died this week. And that's what I want to talk about. Are you ready? No, I'm never going to be ready. But here we go. Welcome to episode 111. This is where I come up with a stat or a player. We're not 48 hours after the passing of my childhood hero, Ryne Sandberg. So this is going to be the Ryne Sandberg episode. Maybe all the rest of the episodes will be the Ryne Sandberg episode. He was that little gimmick. I first got the idea when I hit episode 23 a couple years ago. And I said, oh, well, it's the Ryne Sandberg episode of this podcast. And I didn't do it as a regular thing for another, 10 or 15 episodes. But yeah, planting that seed was cool. And Ryno was always my guy. And this week hit hard. I knew he was sick. It was very, very clear that he wasn't doing well from the things coming out of the Cubs organization. We saw Kerry Wood and John Lester at games wearing Sandberg jerseys. Not that they would never do that, but that's just not something that the players often do. There was clearly a tribute going on. We've seen the heartfelt reactions. Rick Sutcliffe and Sean Dunston broke me yesterday. I mean, just listening to him talk about him and Andre Dawson and Mark Grace talking to Ryno, and Ryno telling everybody he loved them. And it's something I found in my own life. I've gone through, it's been a rough year, and I haven't done the podcast as much, and personal reasons are the biggest part of that. We've had some travel. I had a kid graduate high school, but there are other things going on in my life that have taken priority, and they've had to, and it's time to start getting back to this. And this was a reminder that there are good times, and there are good times that we'll remember forever. And it doesn't matter. I obviously don't have this scripted, but there are moments in life that impact us in ways that we can't see. Maybe we'll never see, but that we certainly can't see for years and years and years. I started watching baseball. I've talked about this before, so hopefully I'm not boring anybody with this, but it's my show, so I'm going to do what I want. I started watching baseball. It was really the 1981 World Series. My parents were Yankee fans. I've talked about that before. They grew up in an era where the Yankees were on TV. That's who was on every Saturday. Every game of the week was basically the Yankees. So that's who they saw. Those are the players they got to know, and that's who they watched. And for me, I got hooked in that World Series. That's a World Series where Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs in a game. And it really got me interested in baseball. I was starting to play baseball with friends outside, starting to throw a ball around with my parents. And the next season, I don't know that I was at an age, because I was 7 years old in 1981. So when I was 8 in 1982, I found the Cubs early in the season. It probably wasn't opening day. I can't really remember how I got to it the first time, but I came across baseball. I was like, oh, I remember liking baseball in the World Series last year. Let's watch this. And it was 1982, and they kept talking about the new player, the rookie. And I know Ryne Sandberg got off to a really bad start that season. And something about talking about that rookie and being new, like it sort of clicked in my mind. I was 8. It's not like I really had this deep, coherent thought, but it's kind of like, oh, I'm a new guy, and I'm going to like the new guy. And so I watched him, and obviously he wasn't special for a while, but he became the guy I rooted for Obviously, they had Bill Buckner. They had certainly had better players at that point, although the team was not good. I remember watching in 1983. I thought that team was going to be better. Obviously, so did Lee Elia. He's recently passed as well. Rest in peace, Lee. Gave his famous rant, got fired. And then 84 was really when everything took off for me, and it took off for Ryno. And that was the year I went from liking baseball to starting a lifelong love of baseball, and not just loving the game, not just being a Cubs fan, but really wanting to know how it's played. What do the players do? I started watching guys between pitches whenever I could on the TV, and we would go. I lived just north of Des Moines, and we would go to Iowa Cubs games, and I would watch the players and how they prep before pitches, and I really got sucked into what the game was and how to play it. And the guy I saw the most was Ryne Sandberg. So I saw the quiet captain. I saw the guy who didn't talk. I saw the guy, tucked his head and ran around the bases quickly when he hit a home run. He didn't showboat. Now, to some extent, I love the modern game. I love the players show personality. I was a huge fan of Christopher Morel, William Contreras, Javi Baez, not William Contreras, screw that guy, Wilson Contreras, Javi Baez, PCA now, these guys that have character and style and put themselves into the game. And I think the Ryno thing for me wasn't an anti-personality thing. I think he was just putting himself into the game. I heard a story recently. Somebody in the Discord channel brought it back up. And it was a clip I heard. I forget who was telling the story, but coming up, I think it was Doug Landell. He had a really nice tribute to Ryno, and he was talking about Doug Landell was also a quiet player who early in his career that got taken for lack of caring, lack of effort, not being into it, and not putting in the work. And he was talking about what Ryne Sandberg gave to him when they came together on the Cubs. And Ryno talked a little bit about being a similar kind of player in the minor leagues and having a minor league coach tell him he needs to go. Sometimes you just have to go break a helmet. And so one day he did. He struck out and he was frustrated, and he came in and he took his frustrations out on his helmet and he broke it. And Ryno's answer afterwards, he told Landell, was, okay, now what? Now I just don't have a helmet. I still struck out. Like it wasn't a hit. And I watch, when I watch athletes, I coach kids. Like everybody has their own style, their own way of doing things. I watch some cooking shows and they always talk about like, this is me on a plate. And Ryne Sandberg was always himself on the field. And he was himself on the field every moment he was ever out there. He played hard. He competed hard. He loved being around the team. He loved being around the guys. I've heard a ton of stories lately about being a prankster. And he was just a guy that everybody loved being around. And it didn't always present that way. I heard Rick Sutcliffe talking about how he would always ride to and from the field with Ryno, and they would stay and sign autographs after. And then Ryno would often stop by a little league field and they would just show up out there and sign and get to know the kids and talk to their families. And he always had a way of, and there were times in my career or in his career where it almost came off as almost trying too hard. Like it wasn't always fully genuine, but as I saw him over the years, I think it really and truly was 100% genuine. It really does seem to be who he was. He really had this sense of what he was able to do, and the community he got brought into when he was traded from Philadelphia to Chicago was really special, and he seemed to really appreciate it. And that's really hard to do when you're in that moment. Just like I talk about, the impact people have on you when you don't even realize it's happening. I think Sandberg somehow knew. And I think he knew who he wanted to be, and he did his best to be that person every day. And that not being flashy, not having a lot of style and panache, he let his game speak. And I've seen so many tributes, and a lot of people have hit on the same point. So this is not original groundbreaking thought from me. But he let his game speak. He hit for power. He stole bases. He played phenomenal defense. He won 9 straight Gold Gloves, which is incredible. And just to some extent, there's some Gold Glove inertia. I think we're seeing that with Ian Happ. But by the time Sandberg retired, he was largely seen as maybe the best defensive second baseman ever, certainly up there in the top couple. And one thing I remember, it would have been interesting if advanced metrics had been around when he played, because he didn't have the biggest range. He didn't always he made a lot of flashy plays. I'm not going to lie about that. But there were other guys in the league that made flashier plays, maybe more consistently. But Ryne Sandberg, and we see this a lot from Dansby Swanson, you talk about not giving things away. He made the makeables. He was as reliable as it gets. If he could get to a ball, he was going to field it cleanly and he was going to get off a good throw. And you could just bet money on that every single day. And that kind of consistency, that kind of reliability is a huge part of what makes a winning team. And he was a big part of several winning teams. And I've heard many players, many pitchers talk about just the confidence they had with a guy like him behind them. Sutcliffe's talked about it a bunch. Maddox has talked about it in the past. Just knowing that Ryno's there, he's going to be able to get to a ball. He's going to make a play, and he's going to get you out of an inning. He was really adept at turning double plays at a time when runners could still barrel into and take out the player making the turn at second base. He had a real knack for being able to get that ball, get off the bag as quickly as possible and make a good throw. But we all know what he was as a player, and I want to talk about what he meant to me. Like I said, I was an 8-year-old, kind of identified with the new guy. And then all of a sudden, 1984 happened, and July 23rd, ironically enough, it's my also my wife's birthday. So that's always been an interesting kind of tie there. I had WGN, obviously, so I was able to watch the Cubs. I got to see Ryno play all the time. Seemed like every year he got off to a terrible start offensively, and by the end of the year, his numbers were where they always were. For the most, he had a couple bad seasons, some injury seasons, but he's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. But 1984 comes around. Cubs are actually good. It's exciting. They're pitching well. They had just, in mid-June, they had just traded for Rick Sutcliffe, which would wind up, Rick Sutcliffe would famously go 16-1 that season, win the NL Cy Young. And that was really probably the piece that put them over the top. But they had an exciting team. Bobby Dernier would lead off. Ryne Sandberg always hit second. Harry Carey loved to talk about the daily double. Como, because he loved to bet on horses, and it also had a lot of fun with it with those two players. There were so many times where Dernier would get on and Ryno would go the opposite way on a hit and run, and all of a sudden you had first and third and the Cubs were cooking. So that was fun to watch, and he was elevating his status, and he was becoming a guy who, you would look at for an all-star team and that kind of thing. But then June 23rd, 1984 happened. National Game of the Week, Cubs Cardinals, everything. That game is on. I was looking forward to that game all week. And a lot of my friends were too, because I had a lot of friends that didn't necessarily have cable, didn't have WGN. So they only got to see the Cubs when they were on. There was Monday Night Baseball for a while, and then the Saturday Game of the Week. And we all knew Cubs Cardinals were on that week. I had a lot of Cardinal friends and tuned in. I was so excited to watch that game. And the Cubs got off to a terrible start. They fell behind 9-3. But Sandberg just kept hitting. He wound up going 5 for 6, 2 home runs, triple, drove in 7, I think. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we've all heard it this week. And in that big moment, that day is when Ryne Sandberg put himself on the map nationally. And when I began to realize just how good that Cubs team could be and just how good Ryne Sandberg could be, and just how a player can grow through hard work. He comes up in the 9th, Cubs are behind, down a run. Bruce Sutter, the baddest closer in baseball at the time, who I really didn't have appreciation for. He was a Cub before I started watching. I think maybe he was there in 82, but I never really knew Bruce Sutter as my closer. I remember Bruce Sutter as the hated Cardinals closer that frankly just destroyed the Cubs most of the time. But that day, Ryno got one. He had that classic flat swing. He would launch those line drives to left and went over the bat. It was more than a basket home run, but it went over the basket into the left field stands. Everybody goes nuts because now Ryno, who's having this amazing season, just tied it up off the best closer in baseball. Now, the Cubs don't score another run, but they did put a rally up, which kind of rolled the batting order over a little bit. And at this point, if this was today, Bruce Sutter might not have even, he wouldn't have come into the game until the ninth. And then that would have been it. But pretty sure Sutter came in the eighth inning in that game and he would stay. And it was not uncommon for a closer like him to pitch 2-3 innings. And so the Cardinals come back, they get 2 more runs. Willie McGee had the game of his life. He was actually the NBC player of the game that day, which they obviously kind of rescinded at the end, and obviously it was Ryno's day. But he had 5 hits and drove in 6 or 7 runs. And, so the Cardinals went back up 2. It's like, oh, okay, here we go. Cubs are rallying. The Cubs get a guy on base, and Ryno comes up. Actually, I remember having the thought, he can't do this again. There's no way he's doing this again against Sutter, but he's hitting really well today. Maybe he can just get one in the outfield. Maybe Sarge can come up and do something. But no, he gets another one. And one of my favorite moments watching that in the highlights over the years, I love watching Ryno's home run. I love seeing the crowd go crazy. I love that moment because we've all been there, whether it's life or baseball or another sport we play. The pitcher is so lonely in that situation. He gives up the home run. He's just given up the lead 2 times in the same game. And this guy never did that. And he has to look at the umpire, the catcher, and he has to get the new ball. And so the umpire, the catcher throws him the ball, and you just see him disgustedly snap that ball out of the air. And you can just see how angry he is. And I love those moments in sports when you really get to see the players as the people that they are. And obviously the Cubs are jumping around. They're going crazy, all excited. But that was a Bruce Sutter moment too. And those two, I think, for the rest of their careers and really for the rest of their lives, and unfortunately Bruce Sutter passed away a couple of years ago as well, also from cancer. Those guys were linked forever because of that day. And that became the start. All of a sudden, fans around the country are like, wait, who's this kid? And you start to see the numbers and you see the growth over kind of a really rough rookie year and a better second year. Now all of a sudden he's emerging as a star and the Cubs are good. And he's a very, very, him and Sutcliffe are probably the 2 reasons why the Cubs were as good as they were in 1984. And he's playing an incredible defense and he's stealing bases and he hit 19 triples. 19 triples for a guy who plays home games at Wrigley Field is incredible. He could just do it all. And he was finally developing a power stroke. He had 19 home runs that season. He would later go on and add more power that I'll talk about in a little bit. But that really put him on the map. And really, it was the first time in my sports fandom. And even at that age, I was a Bears fan. I was following Iowa Hawkeye football and basketball. But because I was a new fan, right, only a couple years in, he was the first guy I really saw pop and become a star in my eyes. I knew the Iowa Hawkeyes had great players. I knew about Chuck Long, who was second Heisman race right around that same time period. But I saw Ryno grow into that, and it was the first time I had seen that, and it blew my mind. Because I just pictured these guys as who they were. Coming in when I came into baseball, there were a lot of really good players from the 70s who were still playing, but they were not what they used to be. I remember early watching baseball, I would hear, especially, he's on the South Side, I would hear how great Tom Seaver was. And I would watch him and I'd think, oh, he's a good pitcher, but I don't know, the numbers don't blow me away. I never saw the 1970s version of Tom Seaver, who really was incredible. Steve Carlton was at the end of his career. I saw the end of Rod Carew. Some of these guys legends, they're in the Hall of Fame for a reason. But Ryno was the one I really got to see grow. And because I was lucky enough to have cable and I had WGN, I got to see Ryno grow up from my couch, from my home, from radio in the car. And he really became a big part of my baseball life. And I was my best friend at the time, my best friend growing up. Our parents were super, super tight. So I've known him my entire life. He was also a Ryne Sandberg fan. And coming out of that 84 season, get to the late 80s, and Ryno's established himself as a very good player. Maybe a great, maybe not. That was always a little bit debatable, like how high he ranked relative to others. And this was before he was hitting 30 and 40 home runs. We would start to joke about, oh, Ryno's going to make the Hall of Fame and we're going to go to the induction someday. And, it became, at first, it was like really lobbying for him. It's kind of like a couple idiot teenagers in Iowa having the ability to lobby anything, but really more speaking it into existence. Like, Ryno could be in the Hall of Fame someday. Wouldn't that be incredible? Like this guy we've seen our whole lives and really, really anchors my fandom in baseball. And then also and we'll go. Like, who does that, right? I mean, and then all of a sudden 2005 happened. We're both out of school. He's still back in Iowa. I'm living in Philadelphia at the time. And I started thinking, we always talked about going. I don't know if I can go. Like, my wife and I were in grad school. We didn't have kids yet, but we were in grad school. So money was tight and we had a million things to do. I was working full time and going to grad school. So I don't know if I could do it. And it was 2005. I was in Oklahoma City, not in Philly anymore, but similar thing. I was not in grad school, but at this point I did have young kids. I had one young son. My oldest was born. And I remember just thinking through all the reasons why I couldn't go. And money was still tight. We had the young kid at home. My wife was in a residency program and it was going to make things complicated for me to be gone for a couple days. And life will always give you a million reasons not to do something. And I'm learning the more I can say yes, the more I can go out in the world, the more I can try new things, the more I get back, the happier I am, the more I'm able to connect with people, which is something that I didn't have enough appreciation for over the years. And all of a sudden I was talking to my wife and I was like, maybe I could. And she's like, you could do it. We could make this work. And so I called it. Like, are we doing it? And I think he might remember that conversation better than I do, but in the end we did. And it was one of the best things I've ever done. It was so cool. I had already been to Cooperstown once before on a family trip when I was probably 12, 13. So I knew I loved the Hall of Fame. And that weekend we went through the Hall of Fame, but you really can't see the Hall of Fame on induction weekend. There's just too many people there. It's too crazy. But we saw the high points and got through it all. We were way out in the nosebleeds for induction, but we were there. And we got to spend that weekend back reliving our childhood and going back to those days where we would pretend we'd be playing wiffle ball in the backyard and we would both be trying on Ryno's stance. My actual batting stance, I mean, Ryno did not have a particularly unusual stance. He had a very recognizable and notable stance, but it was pretty classic in terms of where he had his hands, how he had his body weight balanced and all that. But my natural batting stance was pretty close to Ryno's, and I'm sure there's some part of that comes from me trying to emulate him so much. But we would both do that all the time. We would try to be Ryno. We always wanted to be Ryno. 23 is my favorite number to this day because it was his number. And he had it before Jordan. He had it around the same time Mattingly did. And for me, 23 is always going to be Ryne Sandberg. I was never a huge Bulls fan. I mean, I loved watching Michael Jordan. He was amazing to watch, but I've talked about it. I grew up a Celtics fan because that's who I could see on TV in the 80s. It was basically you were a Lakers guy or you were a Celtics guy because they were always on TV. But it was so cool to go back and kind of relive those moments and think back to all those years of watching games and trying to be him. My favorite thing to do, and this really probably is exactly why I became the baseball player that I became. I would go out in the backyard and I would spend hours and hours and hours throwing a tennis ball against my parents' garage. For a long time, we had really rough grass back there. We had some big trees, so you couldn't get sun back there, so the grass didn't grow well. So it was very rocky and bumpy and had all the bad hops. And I used to love just throwing it at an angle so that I would have to be Ryno, going up the middle to get the ball, or I going way back behind first base into a shallow right field to try to field the ball. I would do that for hours. I would throw the Cubs on the radio, and I would go out there. The entire ball game, I'm just throwing ground balls to myself. And it's no surprise. I was never a great baseball player. I did play through high school, but on a very good team with some very good baseball players, but I was not that guy. My defense was always way better than my offense, and I'm sure that is 100% the reason. I could never hit. Certainly could never hit a curveball. So you hit a certain age where that becomes problematic. But Ryno was never far from anything I did. I remember when he got the big contract, I want to say it's like 88, 89. I remember him being on the cover of Sports Illustrated a couple times, once in 84 during his MVP season. Once when he signed, he was the highest paid player in baseball. So for all the talk we have right now about the Cubs will never sign a big star, the Cubs will never give a player this big contract, that was a time when they did. And the Tribune Company at times was notoriously cheap. The Cubs lost Greg Maddux because Larry Himes refused to give him the money he was looking for. But they did it with Ryne Sandberg. And I think he was always that next, that, the Cubs had Ernie Banks and Billy Williams and Ron Santo. And then there was a gap after those guys aged out. Fergie Jenkins kind of filled that for a while. He pitched with those guys and then came back at the end of his career. And then Ryno was that next one, that next fan favorite. And he seemed to always know it and appreciate it and always give back. I remember he's famously has signed millions and millions of things that people would just mail to him. I did that when I was a kid. I sent him a card and he sent it back autographed. And that was really special to me. One of my prized possessions in the world is right now it's in storage. Because I have a move coming up. My parents found a hand painting of his Topps rookie card. So it's it's a little bit bigger than 8x10. An artist just hand painted his rookie card. And so that's something that's going to go back on display after I move. And, that's kind of been with me my whole life. And I have a couple other things. I have a couple signed balls. I have, been able to interact with him in person, but he's just always been there. And there are so many guys that come and go. You love them for a couple of years when they're really good on your team, and then they get traded somewhere else, or they sign somewhere else as a free agent, or they retire and they disappear. It's fine. Everybody has lives and they have to live the life that they want to live. But Ryne Sandberg's life was always baseball. It was always the Cubs. And even when he took his break from when he retired the first time because his marriage was falling apart, and now that's kind of what I'm going through. So I can now relate to Ryno on that level too. He was never that far away. And then he came back, finished his career with the Cubs, and without fail, we would always see him spring training, show up at games. There were the periods where he was managing in the minor leagues. The Cubs had him go and really earn his stripes there. And then when the Cubs didn't hire him, and there was right around before Joe Madden, there were times where a lot of Cubs fans wanted Ryno to manage. I actually never did. I really, really, really did not want Ryne Sandberg to manage the Cubs, because only in very, very rare circumstances does a player or a manager, we'll talk about managers here, managerial tenures almost always, 98% of the time, ends sour. Either the guy isn't as good as you thought he was going to be. And then you're questioning his decisions and you're complaining about what he's doing and the lineups and all that. Or maybe he wins. And it would have been truly amazing for the Cubs to have broken the curse with Ryne Sandberg as manager. But the odds of that happening in my head at the time I thought were pretty low. Honestly, what were the odds the Cubs were going to do it at all? Or it goes well for a while and then it goes south at the end. And I did not want to be in a position where I would ever find myself rooting for or hoping for the Cubs to fire Ryne Sandberg or for him to feel like he needs to quit to move on. So I really didn't want to be manager. I was really happy when he went to Philly and managed, and he did a fine job. He would have been fine with the Cubs. He wasn't a great manager, and I also didn't really think he'd be a great manager. I wasn't sure he had that in him, and that's not a knock. It's just like some guys have it and some don't. But he could lead, certainly. He showed that for years and years as a player. But I was really glad he didn't manage the Cubs. And to this day, I'm very happy he never managed the Cubs. And then after that was over, he was fully back in the fold. He's back at Cubs conventions and around the team in spring training and always showing up at Wrigley Field. And 2 years ago, I went to my first Cubs convention and I was all excited for Ryno. Chance to interact with them, get something signed, say thank you. And that year there was a really bad winter storm. I almost didn't make it to Chicago myself. And he was a late scratch. And I thought at the time it was the weather. It turned out it was the cancer. It was the first time he got the cancer diagnosis. And so he was getting his treatments. Eventually we found out about the cancer. The Cubs Nation was obviously pulling for him hard. But it was disappointing to not see him there. Then last year I went to my second one. I took my son Andrew and he was there. And it was really special to see him. We were bouncing around doing different things. There were times when I was trying to hold seats for us in some of the rooms, and Andrew was all into getting autographs. And my son ran into Ryne Sandberg in the hallway and was able to say hi and got his autograph. I didn't get a picture because I wasn't there. At that point, I think I was in the compound live holding him a seat where he would eventually come back and get Sammy Sosa's autograph because that kid was living his absolute best life that weekend. But I did get to see Ryno in passing a couple times. And then I had the chance to stand in line for his autograph, but I knew I was going to have to be in line at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to start and then be in line for most of the day. And that was the day of the compound and some of the things my son and I wanted to do together. And so I passed on the opportunity, and I've had some regrets since. I think it was around that time we knew his cancer back, but maybe could be coming back. He really lived that last Cubs convention to the fullest. And I wondered a couple times throughout if maybe he thought it was going to be his last one. And I had the thought that it might be my last chance to go stand in a line and wait to meet him. And I'm okay with what I did. I've had little moments of regret, but I think in the end, seeing the way Ryne Sandberg played his career, I think I did what he would have done. I wanted that weekend to be about seeing it through my kid's eyes and giving him the experience of having the chance to fall in love with the game the way I did. I thought I was actually going to make it through this episode without breaking down, but so I did. I gave that up, and he and I had an unbelievable time. I mean, the autographs he got were incredible. I got more autographs than I really ever do because I was kind of following him around when I wasn't holding seats for us. The way I loved the game, the way I loved to play the game when I was a kid, going through high school, practice was my favorite thing because I wasn't good enough to be a high school starter. So I didn't play a lot in games. So practices were my games. That's when I got to hit. That's when I got to go take the field. That's when I got to go run bases. And now today, when I coach the same way I learned the game, and I learned the game from Ryne Sandberg. You don't waste opportunities. You don't give away outs. You don't give away pitches. And I try to teach that effort because now that my favorite age to coach are teenagers, and teenagers are sometimes just wild assholes. We've all been there. I've been there. My kids have been there. But that's an age where you're no longer signed up for baseball because the parents need the kid to have a physical activity a couple nights a week. By 13, 14, these kids are either really trying to make a school team or maybe a higher level travel team, or they are not going to go down those paths, but they still want to have a game in their life and they still want to have a place to play it. And for me, that's beautiful because it was always about playing the game. Talk about playing the game the right way, and we can all debate what the right way is. But if you're going to play, you play hard. If you're going to play, you're going to compete. If you're going to play, you're going to try to do your best. If you're going to play, you want to be out there every single day. You want to be in the lineup every day. I remember talking with my oldest at one point, asking him, he was at an age where he was just growing into what he would become as a baseball player. And he was a pitcher, so he had a different path than I ever had. But when he was still trying to be a position player and pitch, I would ask him like, hey, what's your favorite position to play other than pitcher? And his answer was always in the lineup. He didn't care where he played. He just wanted to play. And my entire baseball life has had Ryne Sandberg in it as, you know, the childhood idol or the star player I loved watching, the guy I wanted to emulate, or the ambassador to the game. I mean, his Hall of Fame speech was incredible. And talked about, I didn't fully at the time necessarily love the shots against the steroid thing, but looking back, it was exactly the Ryne Sandberg speech. It's exactly what you would expect him to say. It's exactly what we would all hope he would say. And that's the player he was. It was all about respect for the game, respect for the opponent, respect for your teammates. And we've always heard that over the years. You rarely ever heard about Ryne Sandberg having beef with anybody in the organization, in any other organization, anywhere in baseball. Because it was all about love for the game and just being in it, living in it every moment. And that's what he taught me. And I might have loved baseball anyway if Ryne Sandberg hadn't been a Cub, or if he had left the Cubs at some point, or if he wasn't my favorite player. But I don't think I ever would have loved the game the same way I do today and immerse myself in the game the way I do today if I hadn't grown up with Ryne Sandberg. So I've gone on longer than I thought I was going to here, but I just want to say big thanks to Ryne Sandberg. He has given me, and all of us really, more baseball memories than we probably ever deserved. Probably even more than he realizes he gave us. And I think he knew he gave us a lot. He will be missed. He will forever be my favorite player. And he'll be missed. Go Cubs.